Hi, my name is Brian Caffo. I'm a professor in the Department of Biostatistics at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and this is the lecture on slidify in the Coursera Data Science Specialization, part of the Data Products class. This class and all the other classes in the specialization are co-taught with my co-instructors Jeff Leake and Roger Pang. Okay. So what is slidify? Slidify is a way to create data-centric presentations. It was created by Ramnath, who's a friend of ours and we like quite a bit. And it streamlines this process of creating and creating presentations so that if you update data or update functions, that all you have to do is recompile the presentation and it gets updated as well. So what slidify really is it's an amalgamation of knitr, Markdown, a bunch of JavaScript libraries, and HTML5 slide decks. So you might have seen, if you're very familiar with some modern HTML presentations, there's kind of a thriving community developing very nifty HTML5 slide decks, and slidify is leveraging that and then making it so that you don't have to sort of know all the ins and outs of HTML5 and JavaScript, that you can just do it directly in R. Slidify is very customizable and it's easy to use because you basically write in Markdown, which, if you haven't used Markdown before, it's a tremendously simple, watered down version of HTML. Or not version of HTML, watered down sort of HTML type language. So slidify allows embedded code chunks that render quite nicely. It also allows mathematical formulas, and what that really means is that the JavaScript library MathJax correctly renders the mathematical formulas, and you type them out in LaTeX. So if you're an academic like me and you're used to LaTeX, that's really great. So anyway, slidify presentations, when you're done, are just HTML files. So you can view them with any web browser, and you can share them very easily. And it's a nice way to give a presentation. I find it's actually quite nice when I go give presentations to do them in slidify, because usually there's already a computer at the lectern, and I just go to my website. I usually host the slidify presentation directly off of GitHub, and so I usually don't even have to bring a drive to transfer my presentation on. Okay, so getting slidify. So it's super easy. Fire up R or RStudio. I like to do it in RStudio. Make sure you have dev tools installed, which is on CRAN. So if you can do install.packages to get dev tools. In fact, here's the command right there. And then you want to make sure it's loaded, so library dev tools. Then you need to install slidify. Ramnath is really developing very actively, so he doesn't seem to put it on CRAN. It's still on GitHub. So you can do install.github, which is a function from DevTools, and slidify, and that's the username that it's looking for in GitHub. And then slidify libraries is just exactly as it sounds, a bunch of library files that slidify needs to run. And then you load libraries slidify. So now let's start creating some slides. You should start by setting the working directory into the project where you want the project to be contained. I actually kind of like doing this in RStudio now. Instead of doing setwd, I just do session and then setting the working directory to the file that I'm working on. So create your project name, and you can type all the commands in for a basic slidify document, but I find it easier is to just use the so-called author command. And if you just do author first deck, it'll kind of populate a somewhat empty slidify document for you to start filling in. It'll put in a little bit just to remind you what the commands are. So what does it do? What does it cause to happen? Well, a directory name of your project is created inside your current directory. Inside of this directory is an assets directory and a file called index.rmd. That's the Markdown file that you'll edit to create your slidify documents. And then the assets directory is populated with a bunch of empty folders for CSS. That's the style sheets, image files, JavaScript and layouts, JavaScript code and layouts. And so what you're going to do is populate this R Markdown file and then run slidify to run it. So any of the customization you should put in those directories. And if you're not really terribly familiar with web development, then I wouldn't bother with those. You can just sort of dig around for style and maybe use other people's open source style files. But if you really know, then that's where you would dig around. Okay. Okay, let's try this out. Up here you're seeing the slidify from the talk that I was just giving, or the lecture I was just giving, but let's try authoring a new one. So I've done library slidify to make sure it's loaded in. Skerbam, there we go. All right, let's see. Oh, it's author, right? Author test. Let me just try that. Test. Oh man, that looks good. Let's see. Oh, look over here. There's tests. Let's look at that file, the index.r markdown file. Ah, there we go. Let's put in a title. Test title. Okay. Subtitle. Subtest title. Author. Me. Job. Well, my real job is kind of messing around on the internet, but so I'll just put internet. Okay. All right. Read and delete. All right, let's just keep this where it's at. Keep all that stuff where it's at. But let me just put a little test thing there. Test slide 2, just to make sure it does slide 2. All right, I've saved it. All right. Oh, look, and it gave a little thing here that it reminds me that it switched to the slide directory. All right, so I'm gonna try slidify. Look, it can autocomplete index.r markdown. Up. See, look what it did. It processed the R code. It copied a bunch of frameworks and the highlighters. That's from the YAML up here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then now let's. I like to have knitter loaded when I work on slidify because there's this function browse URL, and then I can just type browse index.html. It brings up my slidify deck. There we go. There we go. Looks good. Really, really good. Okay, so one thing you need to know about slidify is how do you kind of specify some of the main options. So the way you do it is with this so-called YAML at the beginning of the slide. So YAML is what stands for YAML, yet another markdown language or something like that. Anyway. It's this specific format where you have a bunch of fields or parameters and then a colon and then the values that they take with a pound sign meaning comment. Okay, so here's title will just be the title of your presentation, subtitle will be the subtitle of your presentation, and the slide framework and highlighter will talk about this. The framework will do the formatting for you, so it'll decide what size the title is rendered at, what size the subtitle. Author is you. Write your name. Your job is your job. You can leave these blank. The highlighter talks about some of the effects, and the theme is again a theme. You can play around with those and see what they do. The widgets talks about some math jacks is for mathematical equation rendering. Quiz is for these kind of automated quiz things. Bootstrap is the Twitter Bootstrap style, which is a CSS style that I guess Twitter created. The mode, the mode will depend on where and when you intend to give the presentation. If you would use a different one, for example, self-contained or draft or standalone, depending on whether or not you would have internet access while you're giving the presentation and so on. Slidify will grab all of the libraries and copy them, or it can read them directly off of the internet at the time of giving the presentation, just like JavaScript. You can either have the JavaScript loaded in the if you have JavaScript saved in some files that the web page is importing, you could either have it saved locally or you could grab it from some other source. Okay, so let's see. So this just repeats what I've already said. The highlighter, oh yeah, and I should have mentioned the code. The highlighter is the code highlighter, and we'll go through some code examples in a minute. There's some other fields you can use. For example, if you have a specific place you want your assets directory to be, if you have a logo and you want it loaded in, and so on. But I think a lot of these are kind of options that you'll kind of learn as you need to learn them. So this is the YAML for the presentation I'm actually giving right now. Well, it's not exactly the presentation because I pretended like I wrote it when in fact Jeff actually wrote these slides for the most part. So what do you do then? Okay, after you've done editing your YAML, so you've got kind of a slide style that you're interested in, and you could go through Ramneth's website or a lot of there's tons of slidify information on the internet to find different themes that you like and so on. This is in the I/O theme, Google I/O theme, which was created by Google for one of their developer conferences, and it's been open source, so a lot of us use it. So the nice thing about Markdown is, for example, if you want an ordered list, you just write 1, 2, 3, and then when you slidify this list, it renders it as an HTML ordered list, enumerated list. A slide in slidify is demarked by the 3 dashes at in between. They need to be in a line all by themselves. I find in slidify, often the biggest way I'm messing things up is I have text that's sort of touching when it needs a new line in between it. So always check that. The 2 pound signs have there's I think it's 2 pound signs I believe is H1, the HTML equivalent of H1 when the Markdown gets rendered. Let's see, these like dot class pound ID, this is how you can add slide specific options to that slide in slidify. It looks like this kind of format here, but before you do that, I would get used to just using ordinary slidify before you started messing around with the slide specific changes. Okay, then when you're done, you compile your R Markdown file with slidify. We've seen how to do that. And then if you have knitr installed, you can do browse URL. If not, you can just open up Explorer or whatever it's called in whatever operating system you're using and double click on the HTML file. It'll bring it up for you. And by the way, after you've re-slidified it, you can just switch over to your browser and type Control-R or Apple-R or whatever refreshes the page. You don't have to actually reload the slide every time. Okay, so how do you publish things? Well, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So you have, if you do it as standalone, for example, you just have standalone HTML with all the libraries in a file there. You can put it on wherever if you have some space to host it on the web. If you want to publish it to GitHub, you can create a new empty repository, and then slidify has a command that's just publish GitHub user, then the repo that you want it in. And if you're one of the people like us that actually often host websites off of GitHub using GitHub Pages, then this is particularly nice because not only can you put the slidify code in the HTML on GitHub, but you can actually web host it off of GitHub as well. That's the easy way. Slidify has some other ways of publishing. If you have a public Dropbox folder, it will copy it to Dropbox, and then just like you can host an HTML file off of Dropbox, it can do it that way. You can put the HTML file wherever you'd like. I tend to use GitHub, but there's other options as well. If you can actually just send the HTML file, a zipped up directory to someone if you want to never have it be hosted on the internet. So there's different frameworks. Here's some of the different frameworks. I tend to use I/O So that one's first. But some of these HTML effects are actually pretty fancy, so you should check them out. A lot of them are really neat. LaTeX is pretty easy if you have reason to include math. So if you do x squared in single dollar signs, you get x raised to the power 2, like that. Or x caret 2 gets x raised to the power 2. Your YAML has to have MathJax loaded in the widgets. MathJax is a mathematics rendering JavaScript library. So here's an example right here of putting the quadratic formula. There we go. Let's see. If you actually want to do some more advanced HTML than what Markdown lets you do, just try putting the HTML in the Markdown file. 99% of the time that just works. So that's like images or tables, where if you want more control than Markdown actually gives you, then you might just include the raw HTML. Also, you can always edit the final HTML slide deck that you get out of Slidify. But again, I wouldn't say this is the best solution. Like, if you're gonna do that, why not have just coded in HTML to begin with? The whole point of doing Slidify is that you can embed your R code. But anyway, it's sometimes useful in a pinch if you're frantically preparing course slides at the last minute like me, and you just have something that you can't change and you can't figure out how to do in Slidify, but you know how to use the HTML. And then you can do whatever else you normally do in a web page after you're done. But again, to me it ruins a lot of the utility of Slidify if you don't do basically everything with the Slidify command. There's a lot better web development solutions if you're removing the condition that you want to compile the R code along with the presentation. If you remove that requirement, then there's so many web authoring tools that I don't think at that point Slidify wouldn't be competitive anymore. The only reason is to use it for this specific purpose where you're using R. Or maybe if you happen to be familiar with R and not too familiar with other web technologies. So it's actually kind of interesting. You can add interactive elements to Slidify. You can add things like quiz questions. You can have it where the web page can accept quiz questions and give hints, and it has a very nice format. You can add interactive R chart plots. You can add shiny apps. Of course, all these things are standard HTML things. So you could do it directly with the HTML / JavaScript, but Ramnath has coded this directly into Slidify, and I give the link here where you can see some of these examples. So we'll do one. So here's the R Markdown syntax, right? So here's the R Markdown syntax. Yeah, I would just write question 1, what's 1 plus 1? I would say, here's my set of answers, and I put the underscores around 2 here because that's the correct answer. I put a hint of this form, and I put an explanation of this form, and that's the slide syntax, okay, that I would use. And then it looks like this when it comes up. So if I do 1 and I try submit answer, it says no, you're wrong. If I try 3, I submit answer, it said no, you're wrong. If I try 4, submit it, no, you're wrong. Darn it, this is a hard question. Maybe I could ask for a hint. It says this is a hint. Well, that's a pretty useful hint. Now I know the answer, it's 2. And then now I can submit and show the answer, which might drop down an explanation, except it's getting chopped off because of how I'm recording the screen, but it just says this is an explanation. It's got a little okay. The style here is the Twitter Bootstrap style. You can clear it and try it again. This time I'm confident I can get the right answer. Okay, so having taken the reproducible research class, everyone in this class knows how to use knitr, but let's just briefly go through using Slidify, embedding a simple R command into Slidify. So let me just do, I want to do 1 to 10. I want to do sum 1 to 10, and a friend told me that that has to be 10 times 11 divided by 2. So I'm going to check that out. Okay. And so, oh, by the way, you can just do knit HTML, knit the document, right? And that's also the same thing. And it brings up the preview, right? It brings up the preview. So there's our thing. There it is. Okay, so it says sum 1 to 10, 55. 10 times 11 divided by 2, 55. Okay. And it has all the same options as ordinary knitter. So, and you get autocomplete in RStudio. So you can see them, for example, you could do echo equals false, save it, knit the HTML, and now look, it only puts out the output. Okay, right? Or you could do echo equals true, but results equals hide, right? And then do it, and then now it just puts the commands without the results. Okay, and if you want just some code that it doesn't evaluate, you can just say, if you just want some R code that it doesn't evaluate, or something that looks like code right here, you can always just do something like that. And then it won't evaluate it.